Want to thank the audience joining us now. Appreciate the time today. Very much looking forward to the ensuing discussion. I'll open us up by thanking Reuters Events for putting this discussion together. You have joined us for Sink or Swim, navigate the turbulent waters of evolving customer expectations. We're going to explore today developing challenges around customer relationships while streamlining claims processes through the utilization of ever more powerful digital tools. I'm Michael Fidel, Managing Director of InsuredTech Ohio. I am extremely passionate about the value of insurance and its vital impact on society, as much as I'm intrigued by the innovation and technology that is driving the evolution of our industry. I'm pleased to be joined by four panelists today. A brief introduction on their behalf. We're joined by Greg Hamlin, SVP of Resolution at Berkeley Industrial Comp, Lori Pon, AVP of Claims Transformation, as well as Program and Change Management at the Hanover Insurance Comp, Stephanie Banky, Director of Solutions Consulting at High Marley, and Tanya Sanfiel, Director of P&C Claims at Assurant. Thank you all for joining us today. A quick call out as well to the audience members who are tuning in. Your participation is very much vital. Would love to see any questions that you want to submit sent through the Q&A feature on the Zoom meeting today. So please utilize that versus the chat, but we'll keep a lookout on both. Want to open it up first and foremost to our panelists to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your background and focus in this space, as well as dive into a little bit about your day-to-day focus and some of the key points around these challenges that you are particularly passionate about. Greg, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Excellent. So my name is Greg Hamlin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Claims for Berkeley Industrial Comp, and we are a monoline work comp carrier that focuses on high hazard workers' compensation in the workers' compensation space. So I often say if you can fall to your death, light yourself on fire, or blow yourself up at work, those are the kinds of jobs we're insuring. So we are focused on challenging jobs that we insure. And I also host a podcast on workers' compensation claims called Adjusted. So you can catch that about anywhere, where we tackle a lot of topics impacting the industry. And my passion really is driven by trying to find ways to build empathy into the claims adjusting process. We've created over the last 3 or 4 years a pilot program called an empathetic resolution model, where we focus on trying to find ways to change the way claims have been handled in the past to infuse empathy in that process. And because it's a highly regulated industry where there's a lot of opportunities for people to get upset, our goal is to build trust and gain cooperation by doing the right thing.
Thanks, Greg. Lori, over to you.
Hi, I'm Lori Pon. I have a long history of leading innovation, but also having operational experience. So that always helps me be able to translate what the as is, what the to be could be. At the Hanover, I lead program and organizational change management. And when we talk about navigating these seas, it certainly is a journey. And it's one with a lot of expectation involved, sometimes turbulent waters. And how do you really balance those rising tides of expectation? And many of our customers, and I see it in our CSAT data, they don't compare you against other insurers. They're comparing you against effortless experiences across this wide customer experience ecosystem. So one of the North Stars that we look at the Hanover is balancing people, process, technology, and data. How can we reimagine the way that we work, but our North Star being able to try to balance all of these different great innovations that are coming to us at the speed of light. I've seen more investment in our industry in the past 5 years than I probably have in the past 20 that I've been in the industry. So all these great technologies, all of these possibilities to deliver frictionless service, how do you navigate those waters? How do you balance it against build buy in your own ecosystem? And then with this hybrid approach of balancing digitalization as well as human touch, I certainly agree with Greg around how do you balance human touch with automation? And that's one of our key points that we always have as an overriding organizational change management North Star, making sure that we're embracing different ways of working with partners that are inclusive, that allow us a seat at the table, allow us to ideate, co-ideate. We do a lot of co-design thinking, A/B testing with partners, and roadmap conversations on how we move forward together to co-address pain points. And I think delivering that hyper-personalized experience, whether it be high touch, no touch, low touch, we're always looking for right touch. So that's one of the things I'm really committed in leading program and change management. How do we have a WIFM for the customer, a WIFM for our staff, a WIFM for our agents? And those are some of the things that keep me awake at night and always energized in leading this down this innovation pathway. But I'm really excited to play such a key role in reimagining the way that we deliver at that claim moment of truth.
Love that intro, Lori. Stephanie, over to you.
I always tease that it's always a pain to follow Lori on these because she's just remarkable. Always, Lori. I'm always impressed no matter how many times we get together. I'm Stephanie Banky. I'm with Hi Marley, and I've been in the insurance industry 35 plus years in a number of roles. And the most recently was about the last 10 years has been in claims innovation and strategy. And, when we talk about customer expectations, I think, fortunately, we have a ton of data in this space. And so I always start with the data. If you ask me what I'm passionate about, it's the idea of human-centered design, that everything that we do, we should always be asking ourselves, how is that going to land on the humans on the other side of this interaction? But the data in this space tells us, JD Power data tells us that, the digital claim satisfaction has been in decline for the last 2 years, right? We know that. We know from Accenture that 77% of customers that are dissatisfied with their claim experience are willing to shop. And that puts about $34 billion of premium at risk. But we also know from additional studies that customers are sort of 2 times more likely to say that a claim progressed quickly if they get regular updates. And in Hi Marley's own data, on a day-to-day basis, we dig into our conversational data all the time. And we know that, when we looked at 25,000 customer surveys, we know that the number one driver of a 5-star customer experience is the adjuster attitude, the adjuster's behavior, right? And so as we're designing systems, not just thinking about the end customer as that human-centered design, but the adjuster, and my personal belief that you don't have a great customer experience if you don't have a great adjuster experience. And so as we're designing technology and tools, what are we doing to help the adjuster? So today they do a lot of harvesting and hunting, right? They hunt for data, they harvest that data. How can we bring it to them at the right time so that they then can share it with the customers, or automated systems, right, can share it with customers? And as we dive into our conversational data to understand what is creating that dissatisfaction, we find that about a third of the inquiries that come in from customers are all around what's next. And I think sometimes in our industry, we forget that, many of us on the phone have been doing this for, 20 or more years. And we know exactly what happens next. But a customer may not have filed a claim in 18 years, right? And they don't know what happens next. And so as we're moving from pivot point in the claim to another pivot point in the claim, the customer often doesn't know what to expect. And so I'm really excited to explore that with this group today. And just thank you for having me on the panel.
Privilege, Stephanie. Tanya, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Stephanie, I'll echo your statements about having to follow Lori. She covers the gambit of everything that a lot of us probably want to talk about. But Tanya Sanfiel, I work with Assurance, and I am a director of claims. I have the privilege of being able to work with the renters team, the renters product, oversee customer experience, and I also have the opportunity to work on all of our digital initiatives from a claims perspective. So very similar to like Stephanie and Lori and Greg, I'm very interested in the data. I'm very passionate about data and making sure that we're leveraging that to drive our customer experience. And to Stephanie's point, the employee experience. We want to be able to make the adjuster's job as easy as possible. Very similar to what Stephanie said, most of our customers haven't been through a claim before. It's not something that they're very familiar with. So making sure that we manage expectations, leveraging the data, segmenting our customer base, right? We can't just look at the overall generality of the claims experience. Like, how are we looking at it from a cause of loss, from a product perspective, from a demographic perspective? How can we make sure that we're driving each customer base to what they're looking for? So I've had the opportunity to work on projects related to automating a subset of our claims, having that low touch portion of our claims, even within our high touch, being able to make it easy for the adjuster to just kind of tie up the bow and finalize the claim, giving them tools to enhance communication, making sure that we're managing those expectations, and digitizing our payments. We know at the end of the day, the customers are just looking to get back to where they were, right? So the faster that we can get them there from, digital payment perspective, the better. And I also have the opportunity right now to work on modernizing our systems, our claims billing and policy system. So really excited to be part of this panel along my peers, and excited for this discussion.
Excited to have you as well, Tanya. So first question to our panelists. Before we get to it, I want to remind the audience to keep your questions coming through. So please hit the Q&A feature anytime to share your questions. I will do our very best to get to those questions as a matter of priority. So do send them in. I think a good starting point is to frame technology's role in improving the customer experience. Lori, you touched on this a bit in terms of finding the right touch versus any sort of technical point of view. What makes sense from a customer standpoint, first and foremost, in driving the strategy? But let's take a step back and think about how we plan on evolving, or how your companies are currently going through transformation right now. Greg, I'll turn this over to you. What are some of the key ways in which you think about technology, and what sort of role, how should that role be seen internally well in advance of trying to implement anything?
Thanks, Michael. I think that's an excellent question. There's a really great book, if people haven't read it, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahn, where he talks a lot about and there's a lot to dive into in there, but the concept is there are some things that technology does a lot better. Computers don't generally have biases, we do. But on the flip side, human beings can do some things that technology can't do really well. I would argue you can't have a relationship with your phone. I think my teenagers would probably say you could, but I think the concept is we want to be able to reach out and build those relationships of trust, show empathy, and to take some of those steps that computers don't do as well. I can think of some of my most frustrating experiences as a customer when I've had to press 3, press 9, get transferred. Then there's a question, please say what you'd like to talk about. And you've tried to say the phrase 4 times, then you put on hold, then you're transferred to a supervisor. And 30 minutes later, you never want to do business or have another interaction with that particular entity. So what we want to do is meet people where they're at, communicate with them the way that they want to be communicated. Some prefer the texting system or a chat bot. Others really want a human being. And so figuring out how to do that and navigate that, while at the same time looking at the processes that slow down the claims side and using technology to integrate in there to smooth those out. A lot of the data entry, a lot of the analytics piece can be handled so that we can redirect our energies towards building those relationships with our customers.
Stephanie, as a company working closely with different carriers to try to solve how technology can be used to improve the claims experience, how do you see the role of technology overall?
I see it as bringing the data, the information forward. So giving strength to the voice of the customer, or giving strength. So I think about some of the things that Marley digs into when we look at our data, and what I think is next on the horizon. And we talk a lot about next best action in our industry. We talk a lot about that, but there's huge difference, let's just say, in 2 conversations that may come in to an adjuster. One that says, my surgery is scheduled to take a workers' comp claim. My surgery is scheduled for tomorrow, but I still didn't get the authorization for this additional blood test that I need before surgery tomorrow, right? And one that says, you mentioned yesterday my payment was on its way. Can you give me a status? Was it mailed, right? Those are 2 very important questions from very important injured workers. but two very different urgencies, sense of urgency, right? And so how can technology bring to the adjuster what the prioritization of those messages are, right? I may have 100 pending files, all that have a sense of urgency. Every injured worker needs my attention. But how do I understand in my queue where the most important is and how I need to respond? And I think technology is going to be good at that. It's getting better. It's going to be good at sifting through all that information and helping to prioritize. And it may not be that final voice in that, but I think it's this augmentation. So I see it, really long way of saying, I sort of see it as augmenting the human intelligence.
I like the contextual example. Keep that up. That's really helpful to think about it that way. Tanya, your thoughts on the role of technology?
I think similar to what Stephanie said, is enabling our ability to deliver an exceptional customer experience. So thinking about, our employee and our customers are used to self-servicing, being able to have full transparency as to what's going on to most of their transactions, right? I don't think that most of us have a lot of or minimal needs to call into an IVR sometimes. We really want to not have to dial into an IVR. Very similar to what Greg says, having to press the 9, the 3 to then say it and it doesn't understand you. It's just not there yet. I want to make it easy. It's simple. We're, and we're very busy, and being able to just take a quick peek online, add an account and see kind of where we're going. I think that's key. I think also from an employee standpoint, being able to manage the levels of empathy, right? So if I'm handling a workload, being able to know that I have a smaller workload that can, to Stephanie's point, prioritize. These guys need empathy. They've gone through a very traumatic experience, and these are not ones that we're going to want to, push online. We want to make sure they have a full human experience versus maybe somebody who hasn't gone through a traumatic experience, and managing those different levels of severity, leveraging the technology to do that. So.
Thank you, Tanya. Lori, your thoughts on tech?
I think some of the same themes. Technology can be an enabler to really supercharge and be able to take some low-hanging fruit off of the adjuster plate, some of that administrivia. And then I think around next best action and serving up for our staff of the future key points where there's not as much manual work, and really you have decision points, and really we're looking at even the persona of who you recruit. Different skill sets will be needed, but technology can really enable us to serve up a more inspiring way to work, a more inspiring claim journey. So we're looking at how can we augment traditional ways of working, but balance that to ensure we're delivering empathy scale, channel of choice, and channels that really make sense, and then balancing the tolerance for MVP, balancing that tolerance to iterate. So those are some of the things that we're trying to keep in balance at the Hanover, and really leveraging technology in a more reimagined way, and doubling down on the organizational change management for the agent, the customer, both internal and external, and picking those right partners that fit to allow you to deliver those super hyper personalized experiences for both your staff, because we all are dealing with that great resignation, and for agents selling your book of business, and customers on the renewal side. Claims is a great opportunity to bond the customer to the organization. So those are some of the things that we try to keep in balance as we look at tech.
I'm very curious about diving into the role empathy plays. It's obviously very vital that there at the right time is a very personal human connection between the organization, the carrier, and the claim that the customer is either making or is continuing to engage in trying to see the resolution of. Through that process, a good question from the audience is, have you seen, whether it's the technical implementation of a tool that allows you, or that you believed would allow the team to accentuate the empathy that you want the customer to feel, or if it's even just operationally a workflow that was meant to focus on the empathy that you want the customer to feel. So it doesn't matter necessarily whether it was a technical implementation, an operational implementation, or just really just a coaching of the adjuster or the team involved in claims. how have you seen the implementation or focus around empathy improve the bottom line? Is a good question. Greg, I'm going to come back to you on this one. We'll cycle back through.
Sounds great. So we at Berkeley Industrial Comp started about a journey about 3 or 4 years ago to build out what we're calling the empathetic resolution model. And it's a pretty big idea, but the big idea is, how do we change the way we handle claims so that we gain cooperation and get better outcomes? And so there wasn't, because there's not necessarily somebody who had done this exactly how we were looking at it, everything's an experiment. So we have about 10 different experiments running at any given time that feed into what we're calling our empathetic resolution model. And a lot of these things, they may not go through the lens of tech, but to do these things takes time. And so what we're doing is looking at the other things we're doing and looking at those processes to use tech to make those things move faster so we can redeploy our efforts over on the empathy side. And some examples of some of the things we did. One of the first things we did is we looked at the first letter that we sent out to our injured workers, which sounded like an attorney wrote it. Not great. So we started over with the letter that goes out now, and we had our adjusters take part in rewriting that. So it starts out by saying, we understand that getting hurt in it at work is challenging here in it. And so we start out with just changing the tone of that and then walking through the steps so that we don't hit the snags, explaining, here are the problems. Here's how you're going to get paid. Here's how we calculate this. If you have questions, here's who you call. Here's how you get your medications filled. And everything is step by step. And we totally redid that. So that was a simple first thing. But then we've done other things, like we gave one of our injured workers one of our adjusters said, I would love to send a handwritten card to my injured worker. Well, how do we do that? Okay, we need stamps. That's not a hard thing, but we need a stack of stamps because we don't want to have it running through a postal machine. And where do we get the cards? So we put together and branded cards that we could send out where they could write notes. We talked about sending flowers, but a lot of our injured workers are blue collar workers. Sending flowers are like, I don't know if a steel erection guy wants flowers after surgery. So one of the adjusters said, well, what about cookies? So we set up a deal with Cheryl's Cookies, and we do that now after an injury. So there's little things that can be done, and it's not one big thing, but it's the combination of all of those things. And we're still early in the process, but what we have seen is many of these claims are not getting litigated. We're able to come to a resolution that's good for both parties. We're able to help them get back to their work. One of the injured workers that we had this experience with did an episode on our podcast. So if you want to go there, you can hear his story, and he talks about it. And he's back now on an oil rig, doing work out in the ocean. So there's some really good beginning signs that it's working, but it's also one of those things that until we have the data, we can't prove it. But you know how you can feel something in your gut, it feels right. And we're seeing that. And we're also seeing more engagement from our staff because they want to help others. And so when they feel like they can make an impact, they're also more engaged, more committed, less turnover. So there's other parts that are really added bonuses to that.
Yeah, when you think about success on this front, necessarily focusing on the bottom line may not be where you want to see or where you should be focused in terms of immediate metrics, interaction, speed to response, just internal feedback. If you can't get the customer to tell you immediately until their claim is over, how satisfied are they with this experience, you can certainly talk to your team rather immediately on whether the influx of claims requests are immediately seeing some sort of improvement that allows them to do their job more effectively. All of these metrics, whether they're qualitative or quantitative, kind of build an analytics around whether there's success driving towards better empathy. Lori, your thoughts on how empathy can be measured and how you're kind of even just watching the success of your team's digital transformation. Very curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. How do you measure it? How are you certain that what you're doing is resonating internally and externally? And a couple of things I've seen are very promising innovations across the industry, even partners that I've had the pleasure of being able to ideate, A/B test. One of probably the most impactful ones was leveraging sentiment analysis and in real time, looking at our SMS communications with our customers and sending up beacons if there was sentiment within the message that potentially would need to be addressed, and making that service recovery. That's really in real time. We are measuring our project, our innovation initiatives, looking at our CSAT data, the benchmark of pre-innovation, then when we use it, when we don't, is that driving better customer sentiment? I think Stephanie called out human-centered design. We have a CX and process design team member on our Center of Excellence squad, and keeping that as a North Star, making sure that we're doing our journey mapping, our as is and our to be, identifying personas, both internal and external to the organization, helps us be mindful along the way of when automation and human touch intersect, or you have a hybrid approach, making sure that what you deliver has that empathy built within and at scale. And if you lose sight of that, you typically will see your CSAT plummet. So those are just a few ways that we're measuring. And then we're even leveraging AI within our claim assignment triage, where we're looking at structured and unstructured data to make sure we're getting the claim to the right person at the right time. And you could argue that that's more empathetic if I don't have to repeat my story. So I'm even seeing it permeate other processes. So it's just a very exciting time to be in insurance and see us have exposure to so many tools that can help us deliver at the moment of truth.
Tanya, there's another question from our audience that kind of expands on the topic of tracking success, and it's more focused around avoiding failure. But it really, I think, obviously, the commonality between the two is we're driving towards success, and where we don't find it, there's failure. So, what are some of the ways in which you see yourselves tracking failure, looking at failures that have occurred, and trying to derive strategies from that should improve ways in which you might impact empathy more effectively moving forward? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in order to be able to know whether or not you're succeeding at something, you before you implement, I think you need to know what metrics, what exactly, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, what are you trying to drive, right? What's the goal? Root cause analysis, making sure that we're actually performing that with all the viable parties. I think Greg mentioned how they brought in, their adjusters to add value to that. I mean, they're the front line. They're the ones that see this every single day. So, we can have a copywriter write a letter and make sure it's aligned with our branding, but ultimately our adjusters are the ones that know exactly what the customers are looking for and the questions that they receive. So bringing in all the right parties, making sure we do a root cause analysis, making sure we identify metrics, and then, we work in an agile environment. Once we implement a project, looking at, what's that doing, and the feedback from the customers. We do have transactional points in certain areas of a claim process, specifically around when we use digital tools. For instance, we use Highmarly. And when we use Highmarly, we get that sentiment feedback that Lori was speaking about, and we can see constant coaching coming back to the adjuster with the beacon, with the sentiment analysis, with the surveys that we receive at the end. And the nice thing about that tool that Highmarly provides is that it's on every single conversation. I think we all have a QA process, and we QA a subset of claims, and we listen to a subset of phone calls. But ultimately, through text messaging, through Highmarly, we're able to use all of the data and see what's working well, sharing that as a group with your adjusters. Hey, this person's extremely successful. This is what success looks like. And then identifying our areas of opportunity. Taking a pilot, not just going all in, right? So identify your population and make sure, if there's a way that you can control what your population is before you expand it to the masses is it's best. And we did that with our digital payments. With instant payments, there's obviously increased risk, and we want to make sure that we have the right controls in place. So controlling it through a number of payees or controlling it through dollar amount helps us understand the process better, and then it allows us to tweak and recover from any type of failure. So fail fast, right? But then quickly evolve as quickly as we can. So I think it's identifying your metrics beforehand, bringing in the right people, doing root cause analysis, and it's just continue iterating. So
I do these panels a fair amount, and experimentation is one of the most important elements of every conversation about the evolution of a business. Throw technology out the door. Doesn't matter what role it does or does not play in what's being discussed. If your business isn't experimenting something that is, an intended improvement, whether that's just, again, the attitude of someone who picks up the phone and the first thing, what did they say? Or what's that piece of paper say? How can you experiment in order to prove whether something is successful before you blow it out to the masses? I could not underscore the importance of that from my vantage point. So I appreciate you focusing on that, Tanya. Stephanie, we've talked a lot about analytics. I want to give you an opportunity, and I love that Tanya even invoked the role that Hi Marley is playing in improving some of their ability to do that. So I think your perspective on this from an analytics point of view is a great way to close out the question set.
Thank you. I actually want to jump back for just a second to acknowledge what Greg said. There's been so much great conversation, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, making notes all over the place furiously here. Greg mentioned that when they were looking at empathy, they started with a letter that looked like it was coming from an attorney, right? And I think a lot of times we think of empathy as in, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm so sorry this thing happened to you. And that's very true. But the heart of empathy, I think, is respect. And when you put yourself in the shoes of that person who has never had this incident happen to them before, they've never been injured at work, or they've never been never had their home lost to fire before, they really need to hear in a way that they can process and understand the information. And we're so highly regulated that I think we often mix, well, we have to say it this way because the regulation says I have to say it this way. And then we put that as the primary means of communication rather than this, I have to say it this way. So that's an adjunct to the way I communicate with you. But the way I communicate with you is human to human. So, I don't think we can underscore enough how important it is to demonstrate that respect and empathy actually starting there. So Greg, I wanted to recognize your team for saying that, because I think it's really powerful. From a data analytics perspective, we talked about a lot of things, talked about failing and how you measure that. One of the things that Hi Marley does, folks have talked about our sentiment analysis model, is when a conversation has gotten difficult for a customer, when they're frustrated or when they've threatened litigation, the best thing to do that we find is dive into the data and understand what happened before that, like what led to that. And so, one of the things that we're working on today is a model that understands the questions that come in, because a lot of times when we see this pattern of behavior in the data, what we're seeing in the analysis is it started with an unknown. It started with uncertainty or a little anxiety. And then when that got bigger, if it didn't get answered, if there wasn't a fast enough response, it grew and it grew and it grew. And then it turns into a moment where you're trying to recover, right? You're trying to do a service recovery. So as an industry, how do we get in front of that and understand from that very first question, from that very first letter that doesn't sound very friendly, like how do we nip it in the bud there? And I think, as we continue to dive and do this deep and rich data analysis around these conversations, we'll get better and better at anticipating those needs, right? Again, we know that today, 25% of inquiries are what's the status, right? 31% want to know the next step. What can I expect next? Those are some pretty basic questions that as an industry, we know how to answer, right? And so now we just need the technology in our hands to enable us to do that and to do it proactively so that the customer doesn't even have to send that inquiry out, right? They're being told, and I think, Tanya, you mentioned that rich personalization. So I'm not just going to send a general letter or a general text update. I need it to be very specific to you and your personal circumstances for it to be meaningful, right? And I think we're getting, again, as an industry, I believe we're getting closer to that.
A dominant topic here is speed to resolution. And the next question from an audience member is around real-time payments, which would be the most exceptional experience, right? I have a claim and here comes the payment. So I think there's obviously a broader spectrum of considerations here. So just at a high level, Lori, I'll turn to you to lead us off on this one. What are your thoughts around real-time payment? When is it relevant? How are you even strategically thinking about it at a high level?
So digital payments has probably been one of the most successful projects I've had the pleasure of implementing. And we work with a fintech, tons of experience in the insurance use case. And I think it depends on the sense of urgency of the situation. So if I've lost my home and I need to go get a hotel and I need additional living expense, I might have a very, very high sense of urgency to receive my payment. So we're looking at RTP as a rail of continuing to improve the options. So much like omnichannel in how I'm communicating with you, we have a lot of customers that want to be able to load the payments to their digital wallet. They don't want to have to input the MICR line or give their debit card number. So interestingly enough, we're looking at iterating that out. I think it's really important. Typically, a paid claim is a pretty happy claim, and we are looking at our data, and our data also shares with us that when we can meet that speed to payment expectation, there's no doubt the data supports that on many of those claims, it's up to 1,000 basis points higher when you can deliver the moment of truth. And I, in my journey implementing digital payments, total loss in the 40s, and we started to lead with digital payment north of almost 80, in the high 70s. So, I just think it's really important to understand that that is a key touch point, and you've got to be able to deliver at that moment of truth.
Greg, your thoughts on RTP?
It's a great question. For injured workers, there are a lot of different challenges that we face in receiving payments. We use a lot of direct deposit, which helps with that, and we want to set that up in the beginning. But it is a challenge in that many of our injured workers live. For a long time, we wrote a lot of coal mining, which is, if you think about Appalachia, that's a low technology area. There are a lot of people who still don't even really use the phone very often. And many of our injured workers, when we call them in Eastern Kentucky or West Virginia, they have a daughter or a spouse that's answering the phone. They don't even often get on the phone. So there's some real challenges there. But the big thing I think for us is we try to really push for injured workers anyway, direct deposit, because that way, when there are mail delays and there's weather delays, they have the payments they need. And we try to make sure we explain that from the setup and the beginning of the claim, because we can avoid a lot of pain points if we get ahead of that. And I always tell our adjusters, if you think of your own life, if Friday you were supposed to get paid and your money wasn't in your account, would you be upset? Would you be stressed about how you were going to pay your mortgage or how you were going to pay your car payment, or if you were going to have money for groceries? It's the same for our injured workers. So again, going back to empathy, it's understanding, instead of just getting quickly frustrated, taking that step back and thinking about what can I do so that this scenario doesn't happen. And we've have some other experiments going on other ways to pay, but it is a little harder with our group of injured workers.
Thanks, Greg. Tanya, your thoughts on payments?
So similar to Lori, digital payments is something near and dear to my heart because it has exponential impacts to your net promoter score, to your customer satisfaction. We've done the analysis when we look at claims that have had a digital payment versus those that didn't. There's a huge incremental increase in our net promoter score. So I think, very similar to Greg, I think we need to experiment because real time obviously also imposes risks associated with those payments, making sure that we have the right controls in place, that the payment's going to insure the person that needs it. And starting off with like I mentioned earlier, a smaller population, having controls in place, and then validating, the data. What were your metrics? What were you looking at beforehand, before you implemented, to make sure, like, what would have made you comfortable to increase the threshold or increase your population? Because I think, like, I think most of us can probably say, I don't remember the last time I wrote a check or received a check. I think for the most part, we get Zelle or we get Venmo. We get, Greg, you mentioned the direct deposit. I mean, having to receive something through paper mail just seems it's just not a great customer experience, especially when you think about, somebody that's going through a catastrophic situation. They have a hurricane and they don't have access to their home. They don't have access to their mailbox. Maybe they're living in a hotel. So how do we get those funds immediately? Because perhaps they don't have funds to pay for their additional living expenses because they weren't expecting for this event to happen. So just keeping those components in mind, like the empathy piece of it, especially in a catastrophic situation, thinking about them not having access to their home, ease of use, the less things they have to do, they have to worry about, the better. So I think whenever possible, digital payments is certainly the way to go.
Stephanie, I want to ask a new question. If you have a perspective on payments, do feel free to provide it. But as a bit of a transition, there's an interesting question here that I think is for anyone who doesn't live under a rock, ChatGPT, and where the success of artificial intelligence is going is a hot topic. And there is, I think, a very relevant question, since Hi Marley plays a key role here in the communication around claims. Is there an immediate thought, or has there been a growing inclination on how important AI is immediately playing a role in this space, or potentially will play an ever more valuable role as the practical usability of it continues to gain steam? Your thoughts?
Oh my goodness, one of our favorite topics at Hi Marley is, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and certainly ChatGPT is it's a game changer. I remember being in the car when it was unveiled, I guess I would say, and the engineer I was traveling with said, "Aliens have just landed." Like aliens have, this is how different the world can be with this. And if you haven't played with it, for those of you in the audience who haven't played with it, it's artificial intelligence. You may have seen things like on TikTok where artificial intelligence will draw you a picture of, you describe something and artificial intelligence will draw a picture. ChatGPT is doing that in the language world. And you can do things like, write a sick note for me for tomorrow. I don't want to go to work tomorrow, right? Write a sick note for, and ChatGPT will do that. And then you can say, but now do that in the voice of, Donald Duck, and it will do that as well. But it really has the ability to take us leaps and bounds from where we are today in artificial intelligence and those models and machine learning to where we can be in the future. And when you think about how much data it harvests and uses to make decisions, again, it really is a game changer. And as for the role for AI in what we do, again, we've talked a lot today about empathy and coming alongside our injured workers and our claimants and our customers and supporting them. And artificial intelligence can actually help with providing empathy. It knows when a situation requires empathy. It understands actually what empathy is and what that can look and sound like, and what it could and should look and sound like. But again, I always think of the technology not as replacing the human touch, but as augmenting. So again, if you're thinking about all the things that an adjuster has to do in a given day, and AI being able to go through that list of things that has to be done today and understanding how to prioritize and which communication channel is best suited for which communication, right? And AI helping adjusters get to that place. So I think we haven't even scratched the surface on artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's certainly a long way to go, but it's really exciting. And I know that, probably everybody in the analytics world right now is kind of reeling from the possibilities.
Greg, I want to come to you. That was a great way of breaking it down, Stephanie. Thank you for explaining, for those that may not know much about ChatGPT, a little bit about what it's capable of and where that might play a massive role in the insurance industry. Greg, as someone who puts a lot of time and effort into the podcast, into paying attention to a broad spectrum of things that are changing and shaking the industry, is there a focus on AI from an organizational carrier perspective, or is that still kind of an arm's length away from you and your team?
So I think there's some really fascinating things going on in the industry that will be fun to see how they track out. Some of the examples I've seen there's now technology that can read. When I started as an adjuster, we were just getting into analytics. And so making sure fields were filled out so the correct fields could be pulled to possibly analyze which claims were developing was a big deal. It was very frustrating to the adjusters because they're trying to get the right data in the right data boxes so that it could be pulled by analytics. We're getting to a place now where AI can read the medical notes. And not only can it read the medical notes, it can start connecting ideas that we might, that because the doctor mentioned this concept, whatever it was, that actually means they have high blood pressure. So it's taking it the next step. And I don't know that we've arrived, but we're on the edge of doing some really interesting things on that end. I think on the other side of that, there's some really neat things happening around design choice. So, there's the book Nudge that really started pushing things in the direction of how do we help individuals make better decisions for themselves. The quickest example I can give, I'm a father of 6 kids. My wife's always worried about what they eat. She decided to put all the vegetables and fruits in glass containers that sit in the front of the side door. So the carrots, the fruit, the apples. So when they come over from school, it's the first thing they see instead of having it in the crisper in a drawer that nobody can see. So that's a simple design choice, but it's changing the behavior. So on the work comp side, I've seen where we're starting to use a company called Plethy that's a wearable, where I pulled my shoulder before. They gave me a home exercise program. They gave me some TheraBands. You know what? I maybe used them twice, and I was supposed to be using them every night. And I did go to my physical therapy, but I didn't follow through on what I should have been doing at my home. And so with Plethy, they put an app on their phone. The wearable is a magnet that goes on their arm. It shows them the home exercise program, and then they can do those steps and actually see it on a video, track it on a phone, and provide it to their doctor. And when they wake up in the morning the next day, it says, "Hey, Greg, good morning. It's time to do your home exercise," just like it would be if you had a watch. So I think there's some really neat ways how technology is integrating into claims. And I think we're on the edge of that. So which things succeed and which things fail, I think there's still a lot to know.
Yeah, appreciate that. And this is a massive topic. I feel like talking about some of these in-depth technologies is a whole conversation, obviously, in and of itself. Lori, I want to bring this topic back, I think, to a higher level than just some of the examples of how technology can be implemented, which I've loved. But I do want to think about at a high strategic level, when it comes to digitization, there's a question from the audience that I'm going to try to interpret because I'm not 100% sure reading it. But the way I think I want to twist it is it important to start the digital process from first notice of loss in order to be effective throughout the workflow? Or is it okay strategically to decompartmentalize the claims process and take it in bits? In fact, going so far as to say, well, there's actually kind of in the middle of the flow, payments is obviously kind of at the end of the flow. I can pull the levers to supercharge the digitization of only certain components, even if I haven't initiated that digitization at the beginning. Or is it actually problematic if it's all human at first to then break free from that later on? What are your thoughts?
So that's a really great topic. We're considering that today at the Hanover Group. And I've had success with being able to implement innovation throughout the claim journey. And payments is a great example. We got to flexible payments where I last worked prior to getting to really digitizing F&OL. And it was a win-win across the value chain. So I think it depends on your brand. It depends on the tolerance. But I think that there's wins. And in many instances, you have to go through the process of standardizing and optimizing before you can get to digitizing. And some of those processes have a lot more involved, like F&OL, looking at your IVR.com, your mobile presence. So some of those have a lot more tentacles. And there's ways, I think, to very artfully have innovation projects throughout your ecosystem and be able to roll it out in a somewhat elegant way. So I'm a fan of really taking those opportunities where you have the biggest opportunity to move the needle. So, yeah.
Tanya, your thoughts on where digitization should start or how you guys are attacking it across the claims process?
Yeah, I think it's, I think you can introduce it throughout any point in the claim. We've definitely had experience where, we have some customers, a subset of our customers go directly online to file their claim. And we know that those customers are going to be on board for pretty much the majority of our digital solutions. So whether it's the bidirectional texting with Hi Marley or digital payment, they're definitely willing to self-service and they're comfortable in that channel. We've had customers call into an IVR, and even though they're calling into an IVR, perhaps they just didn't know that we had a website to file their claim. So just letting them know at that point. If at that point they don't want to do it, they want to speak to a customer service rep. Even that customer service rep at that point, once they file their claim, can still offer, we've filed your claim, the claim is filed, but the rest of this information you can actually start providing right now. You don't have to wait for an adjuster. Would you like to do that? And overwhelmingly, the majority say yes. So I think you can successfully introduce digital channels into any point in the claim process. I think it's also key to make sure that the folks that are not fully digital, that are being introduced by a customer service rep or an adjuster is introducing them to this digital channel, is explaining the process and making sure that they're comfortable. So to Lori's point, like the change management piece of making sure that they know the end-to-end process, they can speak to it confidently, because we have seen that if we're not able to explain it correctly, then that's when you'll have your bumps. But we've been able to identify that and retrain, come up with some training for our team, and then we're successful. So just making sure that we equip our team with how that process works if we're going to now start introducing digital at the beginning when a process was originally a human experience.
Thanks, Tanya. Stephanie, we've had a fairly PNC centric conversation, and I'm very curious for your perspective. Someone asked about life and annuity, but regardless of its application, and I would assume that Hi Marley is very diverse, feel free to give us a little bit of insight into whether the communication tools that Hi Marley is offering, your perspective on how it's implemented, does it change even within, let's say, PNC? Does what's being insured and the types of claims change the learning much? And particularly if you can provide a perspective where you're implementing technology outside of PNC for, let's say, life and annuity, does that even more dramatically change the communication approach and what we're learning about how technology should be implemented? Or is it actually a similar human issue across the board, no matter what?
Yeah, it's a great question. And our data tells us a couple of different things. We have about 90% of folks are willing to say, when offered this digital channel, in our example, Hi Marley's texting, when offered an opportunity to text, 90+% say yes. And that is when you're dealing with a customer. Workers' comp is a little bit different because you're dealing with an injured worker. You're not really their insurance company, right? You're somebody that they're dealing with. And so the acceptance rate is a little bit lower. It's in the mid 70s, but still quite high, higher, I think, than a lot of folks assumed. So there's sort of an opt-in, I've called the opt-in difference there, Michael. But anytime you're communicating with a human, again, going back to that sort of that human-centered design, the most efficient, effective way of communicating is going to serve sort of everyone, right? And so I can't think of a time, honestly, when you wouldn't offer a digital offering based on somebody's profile. And I'll give you an example of that. A million years ago, when I was designing, F&OL systems from scratch, the first digital F&OL systems, we were thinking, if somebody is injured, we should probably take them out of the digital channel and give them a person. Somebody is injured. They want to speak to a person. And the reality is, if they went online to file the claim, they went online to file the claim, and you can kick them out of that path. And now we all know, right? It's easy to now look back and say, oh, no. Now we all know, keep them in the channel that they selected, right? But in those early days of designing digital solutions, we thought we knew the human experience better. And we thought we knew when to come in. And so we've even seen things like, a total loss of a home from fire being reported digitally. And you would just simply not think that would ever happen, because why would anyone ever do that? Why wouldn't they pick up the phone and call? But they do. And so again, I would say extending those digital opportunities, that omni-channel experience, regardless of what our own personal bias is, You don't know the person at the moment, what they're experiencing and what channel might work for them. And then when we do know as an industry is keeping them in the channel they've selected as long as possible, gives them the best experience. Now, I will say the claims process is much longer than a banking transaction, or it's longer than a purchasing transaction. And so I don't call it channel disruption. If you reported F&OL digitally, and then maybe you got a phone call 2 weeks later from your nurse case manager on a workers' comp file, or from your auto appraiser, that's not really the same channel necessarily, just because of the length and the duration of what we do for a living is quite a bit different.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, for exploring that with us. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and there's definitely quite a few questions, some of which we won't be able to get to, but the audience questions have been fantastic, and I just wanted it to be on record how strong they are. I want to see how many we can accomplish in the next 5 minutes. So Greg, just a very high level perspective. There's an interesting one here that I'm excited to hit, and that's the balance between the objectivity required in the claims process and how you're balancing it with this focus on empathy. Your thoughts?
Great question. So I think sometimes people confuse empathy and make it into something it's not. And I think we already mentioned like feeling sorry is part of it, but I'm going to give a great example. We have a traumatic loss that came in. The employee was in a car accident driving a semi and had to be cut out of the vehicle to be rescued. So this is a terrible injury, multiple fractures. He's going to be hospitalized for a long time. When the police were there was such a strong smell of marijuana in the car. They immediately ordered a blood test to find out. And in the jurisdiction he's in, if that blood test tests positive, then that claim is going to be denied. Okay, so he's in the hospital right now. We have to make some decisions. We're getting phone calls. Are we going to pay for the treatment? Are we going to give? And meanwhile, we're waiting on this test. So what the adjuster did in this situation, she talked to the injured worker. Well, it turned out his health insurance was destroyed in the car accident. So she went through, contacted the employer, worked with the injured worker, got his health insurance information, got it to the hospital, and said, we're waiting on this information. We don't know yet if we can cover this or not. But in the meantime, we don't want you to be stuck at the hospital not knowing if you can be discharged to rehab or not. So there's a great example of sometimes I think we feel like, well, if we deny it, then we deny it, right? We're not going to talk to the injured worker. We're going to put the hammer down. And we can still do the right thing. We can still be objective and look at the laws and follow those laws and still have empathy for the person that's in that situation. So I think that's the balancing, is we don't want to go so far one direction that we forget that we're a business and we're insuring what we're supposed to be insuring and we're paying for what we owe. At the same time, that doesn't mean that we can stop being human beings.
I love that. And let's carry that thread with only 2-3 minutes left to go. Tanya, I'm going to come to you next. Just hit us with your thoughts on the balance here of attacking data and being empathetic. 60 seconds, just your thoughts on how you're looking at that challenge moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we can definitely be using data to drive that empathy, to identify, any type of performance or coaching that needs to happen with the adjuster, or identifying a segment that perhaps we're alienating. Stephanie mentioned, we don't want to make assumptions about our customer determining what they want to experience. And we can very clearly, now that we have so much data, to be able to slice it out and determine, hey, my fire claims, they actually would love to have a virtual inspection because it's much quicker than having somebody physically go out to a home. They don't want to take time off work to do that. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they need to be working hand in hand, looking at the data, slicing it out by customer segment, and identifying which experience works best for each customer segment.
Lori, your thoughts?
So I agree. I think that it doesn't have to be in conflict, that we're making sure that your report is context sensitive, whether it be in a digital channel or whether it be one of your adjusters, and allowing that judgment and discretion, being able to react in that context and understand my journey so I'm not repeating myself is really, really important as we look at this hybrid environment of automation as well as human touch.
Thank you, Lori. And Stephanie, close us out.
Okay, no pressure there.
You got this.
I do think that the strides we're making in artificial intelligence are going to start blurring the lines between the human showing empathy and systems being able to do that as well. And so I think we're going to find that balance much sooner than we thought and much easier than we anticipated.
Eloquently stated. Thank you, everyone who joined and participated by sending in questions. We tried to get to them all. This was fantastic participation from the audience and the panelists. I thought you guys did a fantastic job guiding everyone through your thoughts and today's conversation. So thank you again for joining us. And to everyone, we'll see you soon.